Hello everybody, my name is Dan, I'm joined here by Fem and Faithy, and welcome to No Deplete, Master Your Keystone. This might be one of the ones that I hate the most, in all honesty. I really dislike Plaguefall. I can't really say why, I just really don't like it. I think it's because of how I was made to do it all of last week, but not to worry. So, coming up into the first pull of Plaguefall, so we've got the mushroom area to begin with, which has a number of pretty interesting mobs. In all honesty, they don't have a whole lot going on, but the number of mobs and what the various different things that they've got that they can do, it's just a couple of things to look out for in particular. So first off, I'll wind it back just a little bit so you can see it going off to begin with. Here we go. So you can see immediately in front of you, you've got the Stormer mob, which has a cast called Fungi Storm. The very first one that it does nothing. It is just there to show you what it does. It's very nice that it doesn't do any damage, so you don't need to worry about it stunning that at all. The Fungi Storm, normally, it basically acts like a group-wide hitting Blade Storm. You want to interrupt it as quickly as possible, but again, standard interrupts don't work. Stunning it, fearing it, incapacitating it, blinding it, etc. They all work. It also doesn't matter when you do it. It's another mob that has a cast into a channel. You can stun it at any point, either on the cast or the channel, and it will not recast until the cooldown of the ability has come back off. The other mob to mention in here is the Fungal Mansa, which is the mob or the mushroom just at the back of the pack, just here. It only has one ability that you really need to look out for, called Wonderglow. It's just a buff onto, I believe, itself and the other mushrooms that's there. Is that right?
Everything.
Everything. Okay, so including the flesh giant.
Yeah.
My goodness. Okay. But Wonderglow, it's just a cast which is a buff to, as Fem mentioned, everything that's friendly to the mob. It's extra damage and it stacks and it casts often enough to stack, and it hits. It causes things to hit pretty hard. It can be spell stolen by a mage. And it's a good amount of extra damage for the mage as well, so if you can control it and if you can communicate that with a mage, and maybe if you have extra dispels, because you obviously will need to look at getting rid of it off of every mob in the pack, ideally, you know, you can obviously let it through if you want, just for a mage to spell steal and take forward like that. There's also the giant, which we won't face again until later on into the dungeon. There's not a whole lot in particular with the giant. There's the little green poop circles on the floor, these ones here, which come from the giant. They are just placed randomly. They do a fair bit of damage, but you have to stand in them for a while before they start doing damage. They are not too deadly. Just make sure you move out of them as quickly as possible. The giant also has a cast called Creepy Crawlies, or Creepy Crawlers. If that cast goes off, it summons some more small additional mobs. Realistically, just casters, so you don't have to deal with any more mobs there. As for the other mobs in this area, the other mushrooms, you have the Harvester and the Soldier in this pack. They're the only other two types of mobs in this first area. They really don't do an awful lot. Certainly nothing that you'd really need to worry about too much, bar the Doom Shroom, which you just saw there, but it's very obvious. You just don't stand in it. It's another one of those things. Just move out of it as quick as you can, and you'll be absolutely fine. So as we work our way through this area, you see another Doom Shroom there. Everyone moves out of it and prepares for the next pack. This next pack, Stormer, Soldier, Fungal Mansa, so we know already we need to deal with stunning on the Stormer and kicking the Fungal Mansa wherever possible. But this first area generally isn't too bad. The first pull as a melee is pretty tricky, or can be pretty tricky, given that you have to dodge all the pools on the floor and they spawn quite rapidly, but the pack normally dies pretty quick as everyone has cooldowns available for that particular moment. If you're playing that pack at all, you will see a lot of runs which look to skip that first area. That is certainly an option, and you can do that with either a Shroud, Invis Pots, or you can do it by running as well, but it is very tricky and you have to be very quick. Now we're moving on to the slime area, and Fem, do you want to run us through the mobs in this area, the slimes plus the plague belchers?
Yeah, there's those two types of mobs. The slimes are basically just dummies. They have that, as you can see on my nameplate auras, they have that buff. If they have that buff, it's purgeable. As you can see, we buffed it with Arcane Torrent. If it's there when they die, they drop a pool of green stuff on the ground. So it basically forces you to move. So it's just convenient to Belf it if you have a Belf, or Master Spell if you have a Priest. Stuff like that, but it's not really important. And they just basically just melee the tank. And then you have these Plague Belchers, which are there to basically showcase the boss mechanic. They spawn they spawn sets of morsels, which if they reach him, increases his damage done and heals him. So you don't want them to reach him, because that will make you run slower. He also does a frontal, which is always aimed at the tank, but you can dodge it as a tank because it like picks its direction at the start of the cast.
Yeah.
So you can dodge it as a tank, and you should, because it does a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, very, very easy mechanics on these mobs to take care of, and as Fem said, the Plague Belcher, it is basically there to let you know what the boss is going to be doing. I do like it when Trash does that, whether it be in Raid or in Dungeons. I think it's actually really, really cool, especially when playing through for the first time, but getting a glimpse of some upcoming mechanics on a boss, that's always neat when they do that. It's like a tutorial, more or less, which is pretty cool. That's always nice. And again, dealing with a pride before we go into the first boss, Globgrog. Not a very difficult boss, really. I mean,
I had a 5-minute Globgrog this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
stuff can happen on this boss.
Stuff can happen on this boss. That's true. Faithy, do you want to take us quickly through the abilities in Globgrog?
Globgrog is pretty similar to the mobs that we just dealt with, as mentioned. First of all, he has a Plague Stomp, which is a knockback mechanic, which knockbacks your groups and gives you a dot, which gives you a slow and a little bit of damage. Secondly, he has a Slime Wave, which is similar to the mobs that we just dealt with, which is just a frontal Slime Wave, which deals a lot of damage in front of him. Do dodge that or you will die. And lastly, he have the slimes that he spawns. However, the boss do have one massive slime. And this slime is basically the boss healing full HP. Very, very scary. Don't want it in on the boss. The smaller adds, you usually just deal with the first set. If you don't have like really big damage and you just kill them off in slows, etc., etc. However, if you have certain classes such as Boomkin, you could mass root them and you don't deal with them at all. So the idea is that what you want to do with the big ad is that you want someone to put a CC on it so you never have to deal with it. It has a lot of HP and it's not worth killing. So you have roots, blinds, paralyze. I think the Pally ability works as well, turn evil, right?
Yeah.
So those are primarily what you'll do to them, and you'll just want to keep them out. You don't want to kill them. So it's quite nice to have a class in that has some form of CC to keep that mob away for the entirety of the fight. The easiest way to making this boss easy is killing him before the second slimes come in. As you can see, we do just about here, because you'll have to have 2 major CCs out on the big slimes, and then getting rid of the small slimes as well. So usually what you do is that the boss will use the slime cast, they'll spawn the slimes, the initial first slime will come out, you'll have to re-CC that, you CC the next one, and then you just kite the boss away from the small one. And by the time that you kite the boss a little bit, it should be dead. If that's not the case, then you kill off the small ones and you kill off the boss on that.
Yeah, a pretty straightforward boss, all things considered. And yeah, it's not too hard to deal with as long as you have a pride going into it. Normally, that does speed things up quite a bit. Normally that would be the first place you'd use Bloodlust, more than likely. But the mage in this group decided to not press it for whatever reason. But again, no big deal. The boss can die pretty fast. There's no issue with that one. So we move on into the next area, which has a lot of new types of mobs. Starting off with the very first pull in front of us, 2 mobs in particular, Slime Claws and a Spinebreaker. The Spinebreaker is probably the more deadly mob in this pack now. Previously, I would have said it would have been the Slime Claws, as they did quite a bit more damage than they do right now. The Spinebreaker itself, 2 particular abilities. One is a frontal, very similar to the first boss and the Plague Belchers that were dealt with just before. You just don't want to stand in it. As well as a a kind of a rupture on the floor, which you just want to move out of as soon as possible. But that pack pretty easily dealt with. The Slime Claws, they don't do a whole lot. They just do a tank cast claw ability, which leaves a disease, which is a damage over time effect, I believe. Or is it just a damage taken increase?
It reduces your stats by X amount.
Well, there you go. So it's effectively a damage taken increase. It's really nasty. If you have a Disease Dispel, of course, you want to be using that one as soon as it's up. If you don't have a Disease Dispel, no big deal. You just want to make sure that they die pretty quickly. They act like humanoids, where they will look to run at low HP. I believe 20% HP is where it triggers, and they'll look to run away. If they do start running, keep an eye on them, just in case they decide to go and pull any other pack in the surrounding area. There was a Plague Rock here as well, but we will be pulling a Plague Rock later on in the dungeon, so we'll explain it then. And we'll move on to these slimes here. These slimes are pretty nasty, if not controlled properly. They have a cast, which is the Corrosive Gunk that you can see them all trying to cast right now. If that goes off, it applies a stacking debuff that you can see on the screen right now. Fem has a couple of stacks of it here. It's a pretty heavy dot that stacks up with every single successive cast that goes through. So if these are not being CC'd or controlled or interrupted in any way, it's just going to continually cast. Everyone's going to have multiple stacks, and someone, if not all of you, are probably going to die, which is obviously not what we want here.
I just want to point out that it's in a radius around them, like a 15-yard radius. You can't.
So it can be outranged.
Yes.
Brilliant. I wish I was ranged. I wish I was ranged so bad. Why do I still play melee, dude? Why do I still play melee? I'm going to talk to Biff and I'm going to get on the Elemental Shaman. That's it.
Yeah.
And then we've got the next couple of mobs just after that. They're nothing particularly dangerous, but I do want to point out the second kind of slime, which is the purple slime, this one right here. It doesn't have any casts. It does have a cast called Withering Filth, I believe it was called.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is a targeted ability on the tank. When that goes off, it applies a debuff to the tank. It hits very hard, but it applies a debuff to the tank, which reduces their haste by a certain percentage. It's annoying more than anything. It does also splash. So if you was a melee, again, more anti-melee, if you're stood on the tank, you will also take the damage and that debuff. It's very, very upsetting. And I've had that happen too many times, and I really don't like it.
Also, the visual on that is bugged. It will say that it's targeting someone else.
I wonder what
it's always targeting the threat target.
I wonder what that was based on, because you must imagine that at some point they either designed it so that they wanted it to cast randomly, and then decided, oh, we'll put it on the tank, but then they didn't change the visual, or maybe at one point it did. Maybe at one point it's or it's just straight up bugged. You know, it could just be straight up bugged. Something I didn't mention about the Spine Breaker before, which you can see on the ground right now, is some slimes that, like every other mob in here, more slimes. They spawn when the Spine Breaker dies. There's 5 of them that spawn. They have a cast which would turn them into the green type of slimes if that cast completes. You don't want that to happen, so you've got 3 options to deal with them. You can kill them, normally. They don't have a lot of HP. Any kind of inconsequential AoE would take them down. You can stomp on them, which you saw even Fem do just here. You can see Fem move over to that low health one and stand on it. If you do choose that option, for each one you stand on, it does quite a bit of damage to you. Also, that damage is physical, which I didn't realize until about 2 weeks ago. That's not magic damage, which I found quite interesting. So if you are a mage looking to clean them up, be careful. Don't go standing on all 5. That will probably kill you. The other way you can deal with it is just by CCing them. If you apply any CC to them, it interrupts the cast. If they're not casting, you will drop combat, so you don't have to stand on them. So if you have an in-cap roll from a druid, or if you have a dragon's breath or something like that, CC them, stop the cast, and then you can just continue as normal without having to deal with them at all. It's pretty good. Now in this area, I want to take this first bit because I want to point something out, and Fem's already laughing because he knows what I'm going to point out. Right. So this area, we haven't talked about Plague Borers yet, which are these mobs right here. They are in the previous area as well, but we didn't pull any. We did pull some, but they were in the very first pack, the second pack. But I'll talk about them here. Plague Borers have a bomb on their back, and On these ones, the bomb is already active. In the first area, you have to bring them down below 30% HP, and then they ignite the bomb. It's one of those usual things. It's with the bomb on its head. It's a bit like the Mana Storms and the bomb on that fight. When the timer finishes, it'll explode, lots of damage, and yeah, it's pretty rough. But when the explosion goes off, it applies a dot to any mob that's inside the explosion radius, and that dot hits very hard. It's a disease, I believe, but it does chunk very hard. You'll have seen, if you've watched any high keys, in particular last week, you'll have seen that any high-pushing team that did Plaguefall would abuse the hell out of these Plague Borers that spawn in this gauntlet to kill the vast majority of trash in the previous area and in the next area. That's how strong they are. They are very strong indeed. So what you look to do in this area is you want to pull Slime Tentacles, which you've got on the screen at the moment. You have the one right in front of Fem. And you just want to basically keep them busy until the bombs explode and killing the tentacle off for you where possible. What I did, which I really am going to love pointing out, you can do this with any class that has a CC. When I was pushing, we had our Hunter doing it. If you send a class over to CC the second Plague Borer, because they always spawn in pairs in this area, if you CC it next to the slime that will spawn here in just a moment, like I said, the bomb's already active, which means that you don't have to hit the Plague Borer at all. So what I did over here was I procced the slime tentacle itself, had the Plague Borer CC'd right next to it, so the bomb was about to go off, and I started evasion tanking the slime tentacle so that it couldn't kill me, and I just kept it busy for as long as possible until it exploded and helped kill the tentacle. You'll see Fem jump over to my rescue in just a moment as my evasion wears off, and you can see that it's already taking a ton of damage before the rest of the group arrives. It's a very, very small optimization and is by no means necessary. It just looks fucking cool. That's basically it, and it makes you feel like a champ when you do it. So, again, a lot of classes can do that. As long as you've got the tools to be able to survive the slime tentacle, it doesn't melee particularly hard, but you do need to have some kind of CC available for if it tries to grab you. They have a grasp ability, which squeezes you and does a fair bit of damage. But I just wanted to point that out because that was pretty cool. The mini-boss at the end of that gauntlet really doesn't do anything, and he is what causes the gauntlet to stop. So once he dies, the gauntlet itself stops. There's a cast that you can interrupt. There's an AoE cast that he does that you just move out of. But again, the Plague Borers, they get pulled in on top of the mini-boss. They explode. Boss falls down very, very quickly. And then we move into the next area, which is Dr. Icker's room. And Fem, I don't believe there's too much else to talk about on the trash here. Is that right? Pretty sure it's all stuff that we've seen already. Plague Binder. I haven't talked about the Plague Binders at all. Do you want to take us quickly through those ones?
Well, they're like super simple mobs. They cast Pestilence Bolt. You want to kick it, but the most important part is Gripping Infection, which basically roots someone for, I think, 6 seconds.
Yeah,
it is dispellable though. But the Plague Binder, that root in combination with the Spinebreaker, is what usually causes people to die.
Yeah.
Because of the Spinebreaker's like thing on the ground.
Yeah.
Paired with the root, then you will usually die.
Yeah, and something to mention on this pack as well. You do have one more type of slime in here, which is the red slime that's right in front of Fem at the moment. It just chain casts. It chain casts viral globs, as you can see right now, which is just group wide damage. But interestingly enough, when it dies, it puts a big red zone on the floor. That red zone is not completely bad. While you're in it, it does do ticking damage. But it also gives you a pretty hefty haste buff. So if your healer is good, and if you have something close by that you can kill, then you can afford to put your group in it, and just, try and kill whatever's in front of you just that little bit quicker. Certainly not worth dying for, so if you are going to do that, try and look at your HP quite closely, just in case. But it's something a little extra, just to speed up the run just that little bit. Again, a lot of the trash that we've already seen, more Spine Breakers, more Plague Binders, all this trash will be enough to proc the third Pride, which we'll then deal with, and then we will go into Dr. Icker, which, do you want to go into that one for us, Faithy?
I think before we do that, there's something that we haven't clarified yet,
Sure.
which is the Covenant ability for the dungeon, which is the Necrolord.
Quite right.
By killing slimes throughout Plaguefall, specific ones, the green ones, the purple ones, and the red ones, you will get a beneficial buff by standing near them if you are a Necrolord. It used to be that you have to cast Fleshcraft. However, that was changed with 9.0.5, and you just have to stand near them to gain their soul. So what that will do is that you'll get a 2-minute buff depending on what slime you've killed. The purple one being a damage reduction onto you, the red one being a haste buff that everyone around you will get, and the green one being a very, very minor dot damage that you will deal. So basically, the priority or the most important one, the strongest one, is the red one and the purple one. But as mentioned, nowadays you don't have to fleshcraft, and you'll get them automatically when you kill them.
Something that's
So yeah, that's pretty important to point out. As the haste buff specifically and damage reduction from the purple one is pretty neat to have.
something that's worth mentioning. I don't know if it was changed in 9.0.5. Maybe you can help clarify it, Fem. But the radius on these buffs when you were flesh crafting them was really small. I don't know if that got buffed at all, but it's not like it's 40-yard radius on the buff. You do have to be very close to the player who actually did receive the main buffs themselves. I don't know if that got changed.
Yards.
It's 15 yards, so it is still pretty small.
Yeah.
So even as ranged, you don't want to be standing like miles away and wondering why you haven't got your haste buff. You do need to be pretty close in, which on the next boss can be a bit of an issue if you're not careful, but Faithy can explain more on that one.
Yeah, so Icker is a boss with like a few mechanics and a few ways to deal with them. He has a mechanic primarily in first phase where he's pretty simple. It's basically just a tank and spank. You're just hitting the boss. Usually you'll push it before he starts using other mechanics. However, if you do tend to use a little bit of time in the first phase before he does his first initial jump, he will do an ability where he jumps up in the air and he will spawn a swirly near someone and he will land on that swirly. And from the direction that he looks, he will, in a cross, make swirlies. And those swirlies land very quickly and they do a lot of damage. So you prefer not standing in them. And of course, when he lands as well, the swirly that he initially drops as well, you don't want to stand in that either. It knocks you away and do a lot of damage. For phase 1, if we take them into phases, that is primarily it. He doesn't really do a lot. If the tank gets far away from Icker, he does start casting an ability, which is interruptible, which is pretty important to interrupt if he actually starts casting it, but that isn't usually the case, and as the tank is pretty much always on him. So as you can see, the boss gets pushed super quick, and you go on to next platforms, which we will just call phase 2. And this is where he starts getting all of his mechanics, right? He gets a bomb, and he gets a purple slime. So we've seen the purple slimes before, but bombs are pretty new. These are not a mob that we have seen before. This is only a boss that's specific to this fight. And what it does is that it will do a cast time, and if that cast time goes through, pretty much a group wipe. You can survive with immunities and big defensives in theory, but it is safer and better just to kill off the bomb, and then you will deal with the second slime. So the second slime being the purple slime, we didn't actually mention that the mobs around the purple slime takes reduced damage. The buff that the purple slime has, just like the other slimes have other buffs, is that everything around it will take a damage reduction. So what you'll do is that you'll kill off the bomb and then you kill off the purple slime. However, it is also important to notice that if you have the purple slime on top of the bomb, it will take less damage. And if you have the purple bomb on top of the purple slime on top of the boss, obviously that will take less damage as well, and that's when you kill it, right? It is also a mechanic or a way to deal with it, is if you have classes with roots and or CC, is that you just CC the purple slime and you just leave it out of the group forever. You don't need to kill it necessarily. It's just the easier way of dealing with it. However, let's say you have blind or rude. If you're very, very quick, you CC it and you pull the boss away from it. You kill off the bomb slime and then you'll just kill off the boss while the slimes are CC'd. You don't necessarily need to deal with any of them. But it is easier at least dealing with the first one and then possibly CCing the last one. But as you can see here, that's not really what we do. We just kill it. It's not a big time loss. And yeah, we didn't really bother doing it. But it is nice to know that it is 8th. That is possible.
Yeah, it's certainly not going to cost you enough time for it to be worth worrying about. CCing it can go wrong. The CC, especially if you do the first one, it will probably break while you're on the second bomb. And it just means that the slime will end up joining you later on. If that does happen, something to mention about the damage reduction, I don't believe that the damage reduction applies to other slimes of the same color. So if you do have two purple slimes together,
apply to slimes.
It doesn't apply to slimes at all. Okay, so that basically it does mean that if you do end up having two together, don't worry. It's only the bomb that would take less damage, or the boss at that moment. There's no huge issue. You can just kill off both those slimes before then killing the boss. That's not a problem at all. So now we're moving into the next area, which has even more new types of mobs. This dungeon is very nicely split into very distinct areas with new types of mobs all the time. So you pretty much see every single type of mob here, bar one. You have the other flesh giant, which I said that we would find later on. Again, we already know what this one does. You've got the zones on the floor, as well as the creepy crawlers cast. But the new mobs that we've got are the Defender of Many Eyes at the top here, and the Sniper, which is just off to the left, as well as the Venom Fang, which is the Sniper's pet. We'll start with the Sniper. It just has random shots. Threat on it doesn't matter too much at all. It will occasionally disengage to get away from whoever has threat on it. It will just disengage in a random direction. The Venom Fang Pet, it is spawned by a cast, which can be kicked and should be kicked. The Venom Fang does hit pretty hard, I believe, right, Fem?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so it's obviously the best option is to get that one kicked whenever possible. It is pretty rough. The Defender of Many Eyes, you can see the one at the top casting Bulwark of Maldraxxus. That ability, it's just a damage reduction for the mob in question, as well as any other mob that's inside that shield. Does that also apply to you as the player, Fem?
Yes.
So in an absolute crisis situation, I suppose you could stack under a shield, but there's no need to do it. There's never a need to do it. You just want to get those killed off as soon as possible. Again, can't be kicked normally, but again, stuns, disorients. Fears also work, which is weird for an undead mob, but they're special undead mobs, so fears also work on these as well. Just get it interrupted as soon as possible and continue as normal. But yeah, that's the majority of mobs that you'll see in the next area. This pack in particular can be pretty tricky. Again, there's two Defenders of Many Eyes, so there's two shields that you need to look at stunning. There's a Sniper in here as well for random damage, as well as the Giant with all the pools on the ground. Something that is worth noting on this pull is if that pull took longer than it did and the whole platform was filled with lots of pools, it's actually better off or more worth to stand in the slime on the side than it is to stand in the pools on the platform. So if you are fast running out of room, especially as a range player, just dip into the pool and try and kill off the mobs, or at least wait until some of the stuff on the platform clears up a little bit. But that's usually pretty easily dealt with. It's just in case the pack takes a bit too long, which it can do if the defenders are not getting stunned. And we are coming up to the final type of mob now, which you'll see, I believe we played it on its own here, because it is a really rough type of mob. The Ambusher. It hits the tank incredibly hard, like most things do in Shadowlands. But this one really does mess the tank up something fierce. It has an ambush ability, which causes it to leap behind the tank and do splash shadow damage, I believe.
Yes. Don't
be stood behind the tank. I can't imagine why you would be, especially as a melee, and range can always be away from it. Just don't stand behind your tank as much as possible. You also have another couple of casts that you want to look to deal with. One of them is Stealthlings, which I will point out to you in just a moment. It looks to spawn a group of spiders away from the mob in a random direction. We will see them in just a second. So there's the ambush going off right there. So the Stealthlings are coming out now, and we stop it here. You can see where the Stealthlings themselves are going to spawn, based on the purple swirly, and it will spawn 8 of them in a pretty close proximity to each other, 6 or 8, one or the other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8. I was right first time. I deserve a tick for that. I'm going to do that now. There we go. So yeah, 8 little Stealthlings, which then begin their own ambush cast. Now, if that ambush cast goes off on all of them, they're going to target one person. That person will die on almost any key level if they all go off on the same person. They hit incredibly hard. As mobs, they don't hit incredibly hard on their own when they melee. They really don't mess the tank up too much. but you want to make sure that you can actually CC them before they get that cast off. They can be CC'd in any number of ways. Again, same as I mentioned so far, AoE stuns and what have you. I believe it was a Dragon's Breath that was used on these ones, so we can have an example of it.
Dragon's Breath.
Yeah, you see that Fem brings them out with a Thunderclap, and then he's just waiting there. He gets the fear off and a Dragon Breath to catch the ones that Fem didn't get. That just interrupts the cast, and then they start attacking the tank instead. The final ability of the Ambusher itself is an enveloping web or enveloping web wrap, which I can't remember which one it is. But it doesn't do much, and really doesn't need to be kicked. In fact, it's better off not kicking it in the majority of cases, because it stops the mob from casting any other more deadly ability, like more Stealthlings or more Ambushers, which could eventually and inevitably just kill your tank. But that covers all the mobs that you're going to see in this area, more or less. And then you've got the final 2 packs off to the sides, which have more of the same mobs. I don't know if you two want to throw in anything on these ones.
Quickly about the ambushers, it is important to note that the Stealthlings needs to get put out before you can CC them. So you can't immediately press Shockwave, you can't immediately press Dragon's Breath, but because they won't get CC'd. So what you need to do is that you have to use an AoE ability on top of them, and then you CC them. So just make sure that you don't use the initial CC to get them out of their stuff.
Yeah, it was something that we noticed in our multiple Plaguefall runs last week, right? It never used to happen that way. It was always a case of once they were put down, you could CC them immediately and it would work. But we found that we don't know if it was just for Shockwave in particular or not, and I still don't know if it's become any clearer to you two. But we found that Fem trying to use Shockwave on the Stealthlings before they've been broken out of their stealth actually just wasn't causing the stun to go off, which was pretty odd. It means that they've probably changed something in 905, they've changed a lot of things so far for the dungeons, but I mean, if we can get a bit of clarity on that within the next week, then obviously we'll bring it to you in next week's show. That's not a problem. But certainly look to try and bring the Stealthlings out of stealth first to make sure you can see the CC go on them, otherwise someone's gonna die. I see someone in chat saying that Fear Sigil still works before bringing them out. If that's the case, then it leads me to believe that it might be a Shockwave specific thing, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because I believe everything else should work if that is the case. But yeah, it's really annoying. Honestly, it's really, really annoying. But not to worry. There's obviously a way to sort that out. Again, as mentioned before, it's just more of the same with the packs here. We've got a sniper and a defender and a ambusher in here. This one in particular can be really annoying when it spawns its the little Stealthlings. That little ridge is kind of annoying to traverse. Jumping over it is not the easiest thing in the world if you approach it from the wrong angle. Trying to jump over the little slightly raised bit just here, that can be pretty problematic. But other than that, the pack itself just dies pretty fast. And same with the pack on the other side. And then we move into Dominant Venomblade, who can get very overwhelming very quickly. Do you want to take us through that one, Fem?
Just something quick to note on this pack specifically.
Yeah.
If you could rewind slightly.
You can do it, but I will do it.
Yeah, you do. You see the Plague Belcher fighting something?
Yeah, I can wind that back a bit more, actually.
Yeah. That, if you press trees on where the sniper is originally standing, your trees can sometimes walk off to those two mobs. So generally, try to move these mobs away from those if you're ever gonna use trees, typhoon them away or something.
Sure.
Yeah, we've lost a couple of keys to that.
Wow. Okay.
I don't know why.
That's pretty wild. Why does that happen? Yeah. Oh well. Okay.
I don't know.
Really good. Okay. And again, on the other side, it is just more of the same. Yeah. But yeah, for the next boss. Yeah. No, take us through that.
Domina Venomblade. Very scary boss. She has very simple mechanics though. She does a tank slash, puts a poison on the tank. Should be dispelled, does a lot of damage. She also calls forth brood assassins, which are hidden by shrouds-ish. Well, it's webbings, I suppose, because they're spiders.
Yep.
Yeah. And in order to get them out, you need to AoE on top of their webs. There's 4 different ones. They spawn randomly throughout the room. You used to be able to mirror image to get them all out, but that's fixed now. So now you actually have to get to each webbing and break them with like any AoE. You can obviously use it at range like Blizzard, for example, if you're a Frost Mage, or you can flare, you can trap. But you'll see me leaping over to them and thunderclapping and stuff. And I'm sure other people will do that too. And then she does the most dangerous ability, which is Shadow Ambush. It's a circle on people or one person. That person is gonna get ambushed, which stuns them, and it does big damage. So, walk out of the group when you get it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty much it.
And something that you may have noticed on that one that we just saw just now is that, of course, as with any type of damaging ability, this one can be immuned. But if you are going to immune it either with an ice block or a bubble, you'll notice here the duration of the debuff itself is actually quite long. It's about 6 seconds or so before it detonates. But if you keep looking at the debuff timer on the paladin who has the ability here, you'll notice that at the moment that he casts bubble, it detonates prematurely because it's getting rid of the debuff on the player, which is what causes the ability to activate. So if you are going to immune it as either a mage or a paladin, it doesn't work with cloak because it cannot be removed by Cloak of Shadows. So ice block or bubble, if you are going to use it, move out of the group before you use it. It's just going to kill someone otherwise, more than likely. It's very, very much not worth detonating too early. Something else that's interesting about that ability is that the damage is tied to the stun itself. And what I mean by that is if you have a way to make yourself stun immune, so whether that be flesh crafting under which soulbind is it, Fem?
The first one.
First one.
I don't know the name of
Whichever one that is.
It's not.
It's not Emily.
It's not Haimir or Emily.
Yeah. Plaguesmith.
The other one.
Plaguesmith. That one. Yeah, someone will
Plague Device or something.
Yeah, but if you have that particular soulbind ability where while you're channeling Fleshcraft you become stun immune, and you have that ability, not being stunned means you won't take damage, which means that abilities like that and abilities like Bladestorm, which does make you CC immune, means they act as a full damage immunity on that ability. It is really strong because that does hit incredibly hard. Again, you can see the assassins being pulled out of their web stealth here. The faster you pull them out, the less debuffs you have on the group. You can see the debuff. It's a non-dispellable debuff. It was just on the mage's debuff frame just before. You probably saw it there, but I'll wind it back just to make absolutely sure. So there you go. You can see it on the mage and the paladin just there. I believe the debuffs themselves disappear as the assassin that applied the debuff to you dies, by the looks of it there. So obviously killing the assassins off as soon as possible is very important. That debuff also stacks, which is why it's important to bring those out as soon as possible. The debuffs will stop stacking once they are all out of stealth. Quickly, we've got the Plague Rock. This is the mob that I was going to talk about at the second area of the dungeon, but we skipped over it just for the sake of smoothness. The Plague Rock just hits the tank pretty hard with a Blight Beak, which reduces the HP that you have by 5% a stack. I can never remember. It reduces the HP. It reduces your HP. That's the main thing. The ability you just saw that knocked Fem back is the wing buffet, or buffet as it should be called, but I prefer calling it a wing buffet because that just sounds nice. It's a lot of damage in a frontal and it knocks you back. The knockback is pretty aggressive as well. It will knock you back pretty far. But yeah, that's all it is for the Plague Rock there. And Fem, how much percentage do you need before going down to the final area if you're not pulling slimes? 85?
It's 84 point something.
84 point something. 85 if you want to be safe, so you can keep that number in mind, and that's not a problem. These first two mobs are basically indicative of the mobs that are going to be in the next area. These are the last two different ones that you'll see, barring the mini-boss. all you need to know, they don't have anything special. They both hit hard. The smaller ones, it's weird. The smaller ones move slowly, the bigger ones move quickly. Weight means nothing to them. They just hit the tank incredibly hard. Most of the time, the tank will just run and not actually tank them for a prolonged period of time. What is important to note is that although in this room, you can see initially that you've got basically all it is just a bunch of small skeletons all around the room, around here, 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 and the one big one here. The mini-boss himself, Bileflesh, just here, has a cast which will turn one of the small skeletons into a bigger monstrosity. If you kill him quickly, he will get less of them off, so you won't have to deal with quite so many large, devoted mobs. Bileflesh himself, he doesn't have much else outside of that. Oozing Caress that he just casted just now is what turns the small skeletons into a big one. He also has a Plague Bolt, which is just a tank cast, provided the tank is in range. And he has a Ghost Step, which is what he did just now. Ghost Step teleports him to another Plague-bound Devoted. It will always go... Faithy died. It'll always go to the... It will always go to the furthest Plague-bound Devoted in... Well, whichever one you're in combat with. Oh, even if you're not in combat with it, he will teleport to any of them. So, for example, if I wind it back a little bit, and this is something that tripped up a lot of people, especially when the tank was a bit too aggressive with moving forward. That includes these two Plague-bound Devoted that you fight at the very beginning of the corridor. And something that I saw a lot of tanks do, especially early on, was pull those two mobs, realize, I don't really need to do much to these, it's only two of them, I'll start the next pull to be efficient. Icker Bileflesh would then teleport, but he wouldn't go to either of the other two packs in the room. He would go all the way back to the beginning of the entrance to this area, which is really, really frustrating, considering it takes him ages to actually come back again. But all the same, you just kill these off really quickly. You don't open AoE too fast, or this happens.
Smile.
There he goes.
Yeah. So the thing about these mobs is that they don't initially start hitting. They need to stand up. Therefore, you're unable to see threat, etc. Right. So if you blast Eager Heart into a mob before they stand up, as I did, then most likely you will do take aggro. So what you like to do is that you wait a little bit, let the tank do damage, and then you start blasting. Yeah. If you are ranged class, you can bypass it by just being ranged, and that's very difficult. So in general, just give the tank a little bit if you're a melee player. Don't burst instantly, unless you're a rogue with tricks, etc., etc.
More ranged favoritism, that's all that is, and I'm sick of it. Something to mention that those small Plague-bound Devoted mobs, they don't have a huge amount of HP, but they are affected by affixes. So one of the worst things that you can do on a week like Bursting or a week like Bolstering is to pull those packs ahead of your tank. Realistically, you want to clean up the first pack first, wait for the mini-boss to teleport into another pack, and let him dictate which pack you kill and when. Doing it by just going happy AoE blasting on all three packs at once is probably going to cause issues with either of those affixes. But on weeks where it's not either of those, then it's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Obviously, we have the final Pride here while Faithy is hugging the floor. And then we've got the final boss of today, Margrave Stradama. And Faithy, do you want the honor of this last one?
Sure. Margrave Stradama is pretty infamous for being a very tight healer boss. The Infectious Brain that she will do throughout the fight does an immense amount of damage to the entire group. And it's very, very known as a healer player that you are gonna suffer. Like, it is very, very hard for a healer. It deals immense amount of damage, especially as you go higher and higher into key. And you are going to see wipes to it very, very likely. So yeah, if you're fast, you can push Stradama while she doesn't do Infectious Brain on the two first, in theory. So that's what we saw here, right? We did Lost and we did Prideful. Normally you want to split it up, so you have Lost for one phase and then Prideful for another. So this wasn't like super ideal. But whilst this is going on, she will spawn a mob. Let's try to find it real quick. Which does a slam. And this slam is a slope, like a circle, that needs to be soaked by the tank. It's very, very important that it's only the tanks that soak it, as it deals a lot of damage, and standing more in it doesn't really do anything. But at the same time, it's always going to be tentacles. Tentacles are going to spawn at always the same pattern, which will be, so the spare place, like where you could be safe, is just around the ad. However, you do not want to be in the circle, but you can hop the circle and you won't be hit by the side. Like you can see, Dan and me being on the outsides of the circle, and we're safe there, right? And it's always going to be the same with the add sub. Next, you go into the down phase, where she goes down, and you're basically dodging tentacles. In the meantime, we have 3 of the devoted mobs spawning. They're just like the mobs that we saw before with the mini-boss. They slap insanely hard on tanks and DPS players if they get aggro. So what you'd like to do is you go with your tank, if you're not a ranged player, smile, and you kill one off at a time while dodging the pattern of the tentacles. Tentacles have different patterns. The one that we have here makes it so one tentacle comes up at a time. So what you'll do is that you'll go around and you'll get on the opposite side, the direction that goes. And then after the first 1 to 2 tentacles have slammed the ground, you'll go where they've just landed. And that will be the safe spot for that pattern. There will be 2 sets of patterns of tentacles before they spawn. So here again, you can see it's 1 by 1 where it goes in a circle. You'll let them swap, and then you'll just go to where it just landed. And you can see the mage blinking into it too early, and it's basically being one-shot by like getting hit by these, right? If you don't have an immunity. So just dodge. It's very, very scary, basically. You don't want to get hit by that. And then Stradama comes up. She has 3 phases of this. She goes up and down. I think it's at 70 and 30, right? Or is it 66 and
66, 33. Fem, we both get check marks for that one.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we have the spawn again. And it's basically a rinse and repeat. Tank soaks the slime. Melee goes to the outskirts of the circle. And here you can see Infectious Brain is being cast. And Infectious Brain is a channel ability that she does, which is stacking dot on all of us, like the entire group. And it deals a lot of damage. So it's basically just a healer job to keep everyone alive. Use some defensive tactically. You can dispel it. And you can immune it as well with like AMS, bubble, etc., etc. So if you do have immunities, then it's definitely worth it. And then you can see again another ad spawns. That is due to us not being fasted, and that is why you usually offset Lost and Pride on this boss, so you can get Stradama down and not get 2 sets of the monstrosity like the ads. If Stradama goes down while the ad is still alive, it becomes a target that moves, and you'll have to kill it as it hits the tanks pretty hard. So just kill that off. While the devotees are always also spawning, so you can see here, we're pretty busy with killing off the remaining ad before we can actually deal with the devoted. So it's just, you can see the tentacles here. This is the 3 pattern slam, where 3 tentacles spawns, and then after those, the entirety of the rest of the platform will spawn. So you just go close to the 3 tentacles, and then when they land, you'll just go into that, and that's how you do with that safe pattern. And you kill off as many devoted as possible. The difference between phase 1, 2, and 3 with Stradama is that she pretty much instantly casts Infectious Brain when she comes up the 3rd time. And that's why you want to offset cooldowns, because she gets more Infectious Brains off in the last phase and becomes quite scary. So everyone who uses cooldowns on the first set will have cooldowns down for the 3rd set. Additionally, she will also spawn Devoted through phase 3, which is also very scary for the tank. So you just want to get them away if possible, CC them, or just slow them and keep them away from your tank. And with that, the boss pretty much falls over and dies. There is no big ads, though, in phase 3. They don't spawn in phase 3. So that does make it a little bit easier for the tank, considering the Devoted spawns. So just kite the Devoted, dodge the tentacles, and then kill off the boss.
Yeah, and then that is basically Plaguefall taken care of. Fem, anything to add to Plaguefall?
No, sounds great.
As you're staring down chat, and that's really freaking me out.
Hello, chat.
What a beautiful man. What a beautiful man.